Hey, how would you like to learn how to buy 52 houses in 52 weeks? What are you talking about? Yes, today is a special day on the Real Estate Investing Mastery podcast. I have the one and only Dolph DeRoos with us in this podcast. When I was first getting started in 2006, I read this book. I saw it. I don't remember where. It might have been Walmart, believe it or not. But I saw his books and his programs later at a Walmart. But I found this book, 52 Homes in 52 Weeks, and that really piqued my interest. I got excited about what is this all about? And then I read the book, and then I bought some of Dolph's programs, and it really lit a fire under me and got me excited. Well, I met Dolph a few weeks ago at an event, at a mastermind, and I said, hey, can I please have you on my podcast? Let's talk about what you're doing. And he is still an active real estate investor today. So we're going to talk about his story, talk about what he's doing these days. Would you please welcome Dolph DeRoos? How are you, Dolph?
I'm great, thanks, Joe. Thank you so much for your kind words. It's my absolute pleasure to be here. I love this stuff.
I love listening to your accent too. We could just talk for hours. It's so much fun. Let me tell you guys, Dolph is genuine, really nice guy. He'll just, I mean, I've looked up to him for years and years, and I got to meet him for the first time. What was that about? I read the book 18 years ago.
That's
right?
A while ago now, yeah.
Yeah, I read that book 18 years ago. And so it's just great to meet you. And I'm so glad to get to introduce you to my audience. So Dolph, can you talk a little bit about how you got started in business? Maybe let's start there, and then we can talk about how you wrote that book.
Sure. So I came from a family, Joe, that never had a chance to go to university. And so they encouraged my sister and I to go and get a degree because they thought that degrees equates to a secure job, and a secure job with, the potential for future advancement. And then you've got financial security. So without thinking, when I finished high school, off I went to university. And during my first week there, I looked around at the people with the degrees. I'm talking about the tutors and the lecturers and the professors. And it occurred to me that they were not uniformly wealthy. I always thought they had very modest clothes, they drove around in rather small cars, and they lived in very modest homes. Nothing wrong with that. But I thought there's something wrong with this formula that degrees equates to wealth. So I took it upon myself to make a study of the rich. I wanted to know, what do the rich have in common? Thinking perhaps somewhat naively that if I could identify 30 or 40 things that they did have in common and emulate them, then I'd have a good shot at being rich, right? It's a good theory. But the challenge was I could hardly find anything that they had in common. It wasn't age, by all accounts, Bill Gates was a young man when he made his first billion. It wasn't gender. It wasn't religious belief. It wasn't country of birth. It wasn't whether you're an immigrant or not, whether you were the firstborn in the family or the lastborn or anywhere in between. I could only find two things that the rich had in common. And one of them is that almost without exception, the rich either made their money or held their wealth in real estate. And I thought, man, if that's all it is, I can do that. Now, I didn't know if it would work, so I thought I'd try it. I didn't give up my studies and say, forget that. I mean, I still believed that degrees were essential, I guess. But I set about buying my first property. And that wasn't easy because I had no money. So I went to the 4 trading banks we had in the day to borrow the maximum student loan I could. And fortunately, none of them asked whether I was going to the other banks as well, because I would have been inclined to be honest and say, well, actually, yes. So I managed to get $4,000, which back then was a lot of money.
What year was this?
Oh, gosh, we're talking about, the late 1970s. It's a long time ago now.
Okay.
And I found a property that I thought would be a really good deal. It was a wooden villa divided into 2 rentable units with 2 more rentable units out the back, motel-style units. And I remember pitching it to a bank, and I gave him my spiel as to why I thought it was a good deal. And he waited patiently. And when I finished talking, he leaned forward and he said, "Are you done?" And I thought that was an odd question, but I said, yes. And he said, "This is a hoax, isn't it? It's a university prank." And I was devastated because it wasn't a prank. I was serious. But fortunately, I didn't give up thinking I'm not cut out for this and try my hand at something else. I went to bank after bank after bank, and I think I went to 7 banks before finally someone said, "I'll take a chance on you." I would have preferred to hear, "Man, that's a good deal. I wish I'd found it." But anyway, we went ahead. I bought it. Within my first month, Joe, I collected more money from my 4 tenants than I needed to pay that month's mortgage commitment. and property taxes and insurance and
Wow.
maintenance. I'd made a profit and I hadn't worked for it. I thought, I've got to do this again. So fast forward, I kept on buying, and it took 4 years in those days to get an honors bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. Right, not the easiest course, I guess. But the university came to me and said, Dolph, it's only one more year for a master's. Why don't you do it? And I said, because, and I didn't have a reason. So I did it. And halfway through that, they came to me and said, you're doing so well. Why don't you switch to doing a PhD? And I said, because, and I didn't have a reason. So I did that as well. And the moral of the story is make sure you know why you do what you do. Otherwise, you end up leading other people's lives, right? So I ended up
Yeah.
spending 8 years at university. Think back to my parents, degrees equates to wealth. Here I'd gotten a PhD. They were happy. I did go to 2 job interviews. And at the end of the second interview, I was offered a job at $32,000 a year, which back then was a ton of money. But the week before, I completed a real estate deal that netted me $35,000. And I remember thinking, why would anyone in his or her right mind work for 40 hours a week, 50 weeks of the year for 32 lousy thousand when in 1 week you can make 35 and take the rest of the year off? So I never took that job. And to this day, I've never had one. I was
Wow.
35 years old, Joe, and I was visiting my parents. They were living back in Europe then, and they picked me up from the airport. And my mother said, you know, Dolph, it's not too late. And I looked at my watch thinking, not too late to have dinner with an aunt or something. I said, for what? And she said, to get a job. And I said, why would I want a job? And she said, you don't have a pension plan, which is like a 401k. I said, my real estate's my pension. Anyway, that's sort of how I got started. I didn't know whether to believe it at first, but that thing, that study I undertook to find out what the rich had in common, it served me very well, I think. And I still
Wow.
stand by it. I know other people make a lot of money in other things, Joe, new technologies. Elon Musk has made more money than I ever will in 5 lifetimes of real estate investing. Warren Buffett's made more than I ever will in real estate. But I think they are the outliers. I think if you take 1,000 people at random and get them, one batch of 1,000 to invest in stocks and one batch of 1,000 to invest in technology and another batch of 1,000 to invest in real estate, I think the 1,000 investing in real estate on average do better than the others. Not because they're smarter, but real estate tends to float all boats, right? A rising tide affects everyone. And real estate goes up and you've got leverage, which you don't have in those other things. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's a long monologue. I'm sorry,
So,
but
no,
that's an
that's
answer.
really, really good. Thank you. Now, so you got started in the 70s in real estate.
Right, right.
So you've been through multiple cycles. And
Yes,
and when you talk about your international real estate experience, you probably have seen 3 times a different number of cycles than we just in the United States have seen, I'm
correct.
sure, right? So
Yes.
can you talk about how has real estate changed since the 70s and how has it stayed the same?
Well, there's a two-part answer to that because, firstly, when I came across my first downturn, I thought the world was coming to an end. Here, everything that in my conscious awareness of me having been alive on this planet, that I'd learned about real estate, that it incrementally goes up and rents go up and values go up, it was shattered by the reality that interest rates were going through the roof and prices were tumbling. And I thought it was the end of the world. Probably not quite literally, but I thought it was pretty close to it. And now let's fast forward. Let's not count the decades too precisely, but 4 or so decades further. And now when I see a downturn like we've experienced a little bit recently, where interest rates went from about 3% to 7.5%, and all other kinds of economic indicators showed that we had a bit of a crisis on our hands. I wasn't thinking, oh, the world's coming to an end. I thought, oh, I wonder how long this is going to last, and what position can I take, and how soon can I take it to benefit from everyone else's panicking?
Yeah.
Because there's one thing about real estate that I've learned, and that is it always overshoots. So when the market is going up, Joe, people overshoot. They bid too much for it. They bid ridiculous prices for it. At that point, you've probably heard we have the greater fall theory, where no matter how big a fool you are to pay too much for a property, it doesn't matter. Next year, there'll be an even bigger fool to pay even more for it. And then when
Yeah.
there's a crash, interest rates are high, values go, liquidity crisis, all that sort of thing, people oversell. They think, oh, this is never going to, let's just ditch it, ditch it, ditch it. So it overshoots and undershoots. And if you can go against the trend, if you can be counter cyclical, then I think you stand a great chance. And the second part of answering your question is it has evolved over the decades. I do believe it was easier 45, 50 years ago. I would not buy commercial real estate that didn't yield me at least 15% and preferably 20%. And they weren't there, every street corner, but you could find them. If you looked hard for a week, you'd find yet another one. Whereas now they're harder to come by. And part of it is technology. One of the great advantages still to this day of real estate is it's not as technologically advanced as, say, the stock market. I'm not bashing the stock market, but when you think about it, when you buy or sell shares or get your agent or broker to buy or sell shares or stock on the stock market, it goes through a centralized computer system. So someone in Kuala Lumpur buying one share of IBM pays the same price as someone in Helsinki or anywhere else on this planet. And real estate is becoming more that way. Some properties are listed on international databases that everyone can view. But many properties are still listed without any database. We have the acronym in the United States called a FSBO, which is short for sale by owner, where for some reason that I can't understand, but I'm happy that they do it, they don't want to trust a real estate agent. So they think, I know this property better than some 21-year-old upstart that never has even lived here. I know what it's worth, and they might price it at, $1 million above what it's worth or $500,000 below what it's worth. And we can benefit from that.
Yeah.
So it's an inefficient market.
I wanted to ask you this later, but I'll ask you this now because it's kind of the same vein. Where do you see the real estate market, maybe the economy in general, heading in the next 12 months? And then, and how could we best position ourselves for that?
Okay, so I want to give a really fair and balanced answer to that. But first, a little disclaimer. I always used to say that I don't have a crystal ball, but the truth is, just between you and I, Joe, I do have a crystal ball. But unfortunately for us, history has proven it to be no more accurate than anyone else's crystal ball. So I can't predict the future. But I do look at long-term trends. And I will say this, I want to give two analogies. So I'm a big fan of Japan and their culture and their society. I managed to learn the language as a kid. I spent a lot of time over there. I like how safe it is. You leave your mobile phone in a Starbucks and come back 2 hours later, it's still there. If I traveled with my daughter when she was 3 or 4, I was never worried that she'd get lost. I was worried that she'd wonder where I am, but I wouldn't be worried that she'd be taken off for some nefarious purpose or whatever. So I love that about it. But they have the second lowest birth rate now in the world. It used to be the lowest for years. So their population is in such steep decline, currently 127 million. They say that by 2060, it will drop below 80 million. There is a university today that it's its last year that it's open because they've only got 2 students left and no enrollments for next year. There are 16 million vacant homes on the market right now that you can buy for about $100 each, but you'd be a fool to because you can't get a tenant. And by the end of the year, it's going to be 20 million vacant homes. Now, this is good for getting rid of congestion on the roads. It's good for getting rid of pollution, but it's not good for the real estate market for the very simple reason that there's a very strong correlation between property value growth and population growth. By the way, the country with now the lowest birth rate is Korea, and they're facing a similar thing. And I read this week in the news that China currently has a population of about 1.4 billion. They think that by the end of the century, it's going to be 680 million or something, massive downturns. So that plays havoc on the real estate market. What is great about the United States, and I'm a big advocate of investing in the US, is that our population is still increasing. Now, we may disagree, not you and I, but people in general in the country philosophically about the cause of why the population is increasing. We've got increasing pressure because abortions are being more and more counted. Then we've got a lot of illegal immigration, lots of people for and against that. I don't think we have much surplus of births over deaths. If anything, it's slightly, but the population's still growing. When I was a kid, I learned the population of the US was 212 million. And when I came to the US, it was about 300 million. Now it's 328 million. That puts upward pressure on real estate values. And it's not just within a country compared to another country. It's within a country. So one of the reasons why I invest a lot in Phoenix and Las Vegas, it's not because I happen to live in Phoenix. People say that you invest there because you happen to live there. No, I chose to live in Phoenix because I wanted to invest there, because for the last 50 years, Phoenix and Las Vegas have held the number 1 and number 2 slot for growth taken by most measures, absolute growth, growth relative to existing population, all those things. They've stood out. And when you've got high population growth, you have high growth in capital value of real estate. And history's borne that out to be true as well.
Yeah.
So we've got to take all those things into account. So looking at that, when you ask my prediction for the next 12 months, it's different for Korea or Japan than it is for the US. I'm optimistic about the US because it's a big market. Despite some challenges to freedoms, we're still one of the freest markets there is. Foreigners can invest in the US. We don't even ask their nationality, but let you or I try to invest in Thailand or other countries. We just can't do it. Or there's a cap to, we can only own 49%. It's complicated, right? But here it's free. It's an open market. And the other thing I love about the US, and it's one of many features why I prefer investing in the US to elsewhere, is we can fix our interest rates for the full duration of a 30-year mortgage or even a 40-year mortgage. Other countries can't do that.
Really?
So when I look at the US, the fact that the population is still increasing, as long as you invest judiciously in regions that have population growth and not population decline, then I think you'll do very well. Is it tougher than it was 40 years ago? Yes. And don't think too much of interest rates. They're 7% now, big deal. When I started investing, Joe, they were 21%. And my highest rate that I paid, willingly I might add, was 23%. And why was I willing to pay those rates? Well, properties were priced accordingly, right, based on affordability. And I knew that in all probability, interest rates would come down eventually, which they did. And when they did, values shot up through the roof. They're not going to stay at 7% forever, I believe. I thought they were going to start coming down this year already. They haven't, but they will come down. And when they do, there's going to be another surge of property values, I believe.
Well, if anything, even if they don't come down, rents will adjust, right? Values will increase. And so it's kind of, I almost look at interest rates as it's obviously important, but relative to what? The growth of the economy, inflation, national debt, affordability. The markets work themselves out. And that's the great thing about investing in real estate. It's a hard asset. It's almost an indestructible asset. And there'll always be, this is one of the things I look at, there will always be a demand for housing.
Absolutely.
People will always need a roof over their heads.
Exactly. No, I love that. I fully agree. There will always be a demand for it. You're absolutely right. And there's another thing, Joe, and that's that real estate investors are the only ones who actually benefit from inflation. You think about it. You've got $1 million invested in the stock market, and $1 million will buy you whatever it buys today, right? 1 million bottles of milk. Whereas in a year's time, through inflation, if that price of a bottle of milk goes up, then your $1 million will only buy you a lot less number of bottles of milk. So even if your portfolio goes from 1 million to 1.1 million, you'll need that extra money to buy the milk or whatever else you want to buy at that stage. With real estate, you get leverage. You borrow money from the bank. And through inflation, that mortgage is easier to pay off in 30 years' time than it is today. And yet they don't ask more for it. If you borrow $300,000, that's all you pay off over 30 years. In 30 years' time, that $300,000 is trivial.
Yeah.
So we benefit from inflation.
So I guess you would say you're bullish on real estate in the United States.
Yes, in the right areas.
In the right areas.
And I mean,
what do you see? What do you see as mistakes to avoid, even in the United States? What are some of the mistakes that you see people are making today that could come back to bite them later on?
So there are many mistakes that people make. Almost as important, even more important than finding a great deal, is avoiding a lemon, because you buy a lemon and that can financially set you back for a long time. So people tend to fall in love with a property and say, oh, it's so cute. That's at least better than saying, well, the neighbor's property is so cute. And that's better than saying, well, the neighbor is so cute. They're all the wrong reasons for buying a property. You should look at the numbers. You know, the beauty of a property is in the balance sheet. And so the biggest mistake is they like some feature about it, or they can imagine themselves living there. When you look for a home to live in, you use a different set of criteria from what you do when you look for an investment property. The numbers have to work. So don't be seduced to fall in love with the property. Fall in love with the numbers. That's the biggest mistake.
That's good. And you talked a lot about that in your books. And I want to talk about that real quick, because this book right here, how do I get to this? Here we go. Boom.
Oh,
this
yes,
was the book.
52 weeks. Yes.
I love this book.
Oh my gosh.
And I want to ask you some questions.
It's so interesting.
Yeah, I want to ask you some questions about that. But one of the other books that you wrote that I really loved was this one. Have you ever heard anybody compliment this book? 101 Ways to Massively Increase the Value of Your Real Estate Without Spending Much Money. I devoured this book.
It's the longest title on Amazon. And I'll often ask people, do you think it was easy to come up with 101 ways? And they look at me and then they think I want the answer. They say, yeah, it was easy. I say, no, it was tough. And it was tough, Joe. It was tough to limit it to 101 ways because there are so many
Oh,
more.
yeah.
And some of the ideas in this book are dated by mere dint of when they were written. Nowadays technology has changed. And so I think I should really come up with the next 101 ways. It just updates it for technology. And there are things you can do now with IP cameras and HomeKit type things. It's all automated and seamless. Electronic locks to gain access for yourself and for cleaning crews, or if you've got an Airbnb or something, it's just so much easier now.
This was a program. I think there's several CDs in this program.
Correct.
Um,
Yes.
how many do you remember? Was it? Oh, there's 10 CDs in Dolph DeRoos Real Estate Investors College, Real Estate Investing for Everyone. Such a great series. Okay, but this book got me excited. And I remember reading this thinking, holy cow, if he can do it, I can do it. So talk about, how did you come up with this idea to buy 52 homes in 52 weeks? And did you actually do it? Talk about the story.
Well, what happened is I had an office, I still have it in Phoenix. And at one stage, I had 11 staff there. And I had a meeting cancel on me in the afternoon. So I jumped on a plane and went to Las Vegas. Now, that sounds outrageous, but it's only 37 minutes of airtime from Phoenix to Las Vegas. So I went up there and I came back to Phoenix and returned back to the office just in time for closing at about 5 o'clock. So as I was coming back in, the staff were getting ready to leave and they said, "Where did you go for the afternoon?" And I said, "Actually, I went up to Vegas." And they said, "What, to gamble?" And I said, "No, I don't gamble." I said, "Actually, I managed to buy a property using none of my own cash and it's cash flow positive." So I mentioned that to my staff. Now, you've got to understand, my company does two things. One is we invest in real estate. And secondly, we teach people how to do it. And my staff stood there almost with their arms folded saying, "But you can't do that. That's impossible." And I thought, if my staff in companies that invest and teach investing in real estate, if they think it's impossible, I bet the rest of the world does too. So I somewhat foolishly made a public announcement that I would do this over and over again. I'd buy one house a week for an entire year using none of my own money and all cash flow positive. And within 2 or 3 months, I totally regretted it because I'd managed to buy a total of 2 properties. And I didn't think I'd just have egg on my face, but an entire omelette. But I was learning the ropes, I guess, because there's a whole, as you may have read in the book, there's a whole sequence of things you can do to make this easy. And you asked whether I managed to achieve it in 52 weeks. No, I ended up doing it in 9 months, which, just as a matter of interest, are completely irrelevant, is a human gestation period. I mean, at the time it takes to make a baby, you can buy 52 homes. And I think one of the reasons why most people don't do it is they just don't think they can, like my staff didn't.
Hmm.
The funny thing is now people read the book and they said, "That's amazing, but I don't think I could do that." And there's nothing in that book that makes it special to me. It's just following a certain sequence of things.
Nice. Talk about what you did in the book and how did you do it?
Well, it all came about because a lot of people go to Vegas because it's their city of last resort, right? They had a failed marriage in Minneapolis and they lost a job in Portland or whatever. So they go to Vegas, place of opportunity. So they buy a house there because houses are being built quite prolifically there. They were back in that time. And they buy them. But then a whole series of things happen. They might lose their job and their boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife leaves them. And they're now $5,000 behind in their mortgage. They miss 3 mortgage payments. And what happens in the US, unlike any other country, is before a bank can take you into foreclosure, they have to put a notice in a publicly notifiable publication somewhere, like a newspaper, to say that in 90 days, unless the client, the home buyer, resolves the issue, they will put their house in foreclosure. So I would read a newspaper called the Las Vegas Legal Daily News. It has births, deaths, marriages, company formations, company solutions, and the NODs, the notices of default. So every day you'd get to see a long list of houses that, if nothing else happens, in 90 days they'll go into foreclosure. So the thing you do is you go to these properties and you knock on the door, and whoever answers, you don't say to them, "Hey, I'm sorry, buddy, you lose them, I buy them." That sort of doesn't go down well, and that you wouldn't get it over the line anyway. But what I would say is something along the lines of, "Hey, I hear your property is in trouble." Not you're in trouble, your property. And sometimes they'd say, "No, it's not," and they'd slam the door in your face, but then 90 days later, you see them go through foreclosure. But more often than not, they'd say, "Yeah, my girlfriend left me and I've lost my job and now I owe the bank $5,000 and I don't know what to do." And I would say, well, I don't know if I can help you, but if I could help you, what would that look like? And they'd say, wow, well, if you pay off the debt I owe the bank, I'm willing to quit claim deed you the property. Now, a quit claim deed, it's not a quick claim deed, it's quit claim. It's a one-page document where you quit any claim you have to a property and assign it to someone else. It doesn't even have to be recorded on the title. If you're in possession of such a quit claim deed signed by the current owner, then you effectively own the property. Ironically, the person signing it, giving it away, basically still carries the debt in his name. So they would say, if you'll pay off the $5,000 debt to the bank, I'll quit claim deed you the property. And I'd say, okay, well, I'll have a crack at doing that. But in the meantime, would you mind staying on the mortgage for a year or two? And their answer would be, stay on the mortgage. I can't afford the mortgage now. That's why I'm in trouble. No, I can't stand it. I say, no, I'll pay the mortgage for you, because if you leave it now, you've got a big black X by your name because you're in default and you won't be able to buy a house for another 10 years. But if you stay on the mortgage and let me pay it for you, then your credit will go through the roof. Well, how do I know you'll pay it? I said, well, I'm going to give the bank $5,000. If I don't pay the mortgage, then I'm going to lose my $5,000, let alone what you'll lose. So I've got a financial incentive. And they'd think about it and they'd say, okay, I'll give that a go. Now, full disclosure, Joe, I have another challenge to overcome, and that is most mortgage documents have a clause called the due on sale clause. That means if a property sells, the mortgage is due. So I'd go to the bank and I'd say, Mr. Bank Manager, I understand you have a client, John and Mary Smith, or if they're already divorced, John Smith. And he'd look, oh, yes, he owes us $5,000. And I'd say, yeah, well, he's kind of a friend of mine, and I'm thinking of paying his $5,000 off. And the bank manager would say, really? Do you feel like a cup of tea or coffee? And I'd say, no, I was just as thirsty as I was before I told you that. But anyway, I said, I want to make sure that you don't invoke the due on sale clause, because to cover my $5,000, I'm going to get him to give me a quit claim deed. And he'd say, oh, no, we won't invoke the due on sale clause. And Joe, you've got to understand, the following week or 2 weeks later, I'd be back there again. And I'd say, hey, Mr. Bank Manager, I've got a couple more friends, Samantha and Tony Hendrickson. And he'd look them up and, ooh, yeah, they owe us $6,000. Yeah, I'm thinking of paying that off too. And he'd look at me and he said, I think I know what you're doing. And you know what he'd do the following week, Joe? He would call me and say, hey, I think I've got some more friends for you. Because the last thing a bank wants to do is take a house into foreclosure, cost them money. And here I was the seemingly benevolent guy that paid off everyone else's mortgage debt. I mean, how nice is that from a bank's perspective? And the people who were losing their homes loved me too, because I saved their credit. And what did I do? I just took over the property. I'd rent it out, and the rent was enough to cover the mortgage payment. So the old owner who was still on the mortgage, his mortgage was paid. 2 years later, the house would have gone up in value. I'd refinance and I'd pay the mortgage off. They'd say, thank you so much. This was a miracle. Everyone wins. And by the way, the main reason why I want the outgoing owner to stay on the mortgage is if I apply for a new mortgage, firstly, there's a $500 application fee. That's not the end of the world. There's a 3-week waiting period. I have to wait 3 weeks, whereas with the quitclaim deed, I can do the deal that day. But thirdly, and most importantly, as an investor, banks will only lend 80%. Whereas when he stays on the mortgage, I just take the whole thing over. I don't have to apply for anything, no fee, no 3 weeks, and I own the property outright. It's kind of cool.
Nice. And so how long, I got a couple questions. How long would you typically stay in that transaction? And was it a couple years? Did you have like a balloon that you gave to that seller?
Well, after 2 years, I'd buy them out. But here's the thing. Often I'd sell them on the basis of a lease option. Because remember I said, Joe, that I'd buy these properties without any of my own cash. And the two examples I gave you, I had to pay $5,000 to pay the first guy's mortgage off and $6,000 for the second person. So how can I, say that no cash when I had to pay $11,000 so far in total? And here's the thing, instead of just renting them out, I'd rent them on what's called a lease option. Sometimes it's called rent to own, but a lease option is they pay a fee to buy an option, and that option gives them the right, but not the obligation, to buy the property at a fixed price in the future. Sometimes the date is predetermined, like in 3 years' time exactly, or it might be within the next 2 years or something like that. And I'd charge, in the first case, $5,000 for that option fee, and that's what went to the bank. And in the second case, $6,000. So it genuinely was none of my own money in the deal. The
Nice.
idea for me, and one of my golden rules, I've got 8 golden rules on real estate. One of them is never sell. Or I had to modify it because sometimes there are extenuating circumstances, seldom sell. So try not to sell. But 33 of these 52 homes were rented out on a lease option basis. And the market went up so much that year that even those people who couldn't afford to buy the property from me, they knew they could sell it on the open market for more than their option price, usually at least 100,000 more. So they would exercise their option and sell it. So I lost most of them through the option process,
Mm.
but I still did well, of course.
Yes, for sure. You still made very good money. If
Hmm.
you were to do that challenge again today,
Yes.
would you do the same thing?
Yeah, you have to wait for the right circumstances. I think we're getting close. People are hurting a bit now. We're seeing the numbers of foreclosures rising ominously. I don't think it's as bad as the 2008 GFC, but circumstances could present themselves where people will just walk away and say, "Oh, quit claim deed it if you just pay off my debt." So the
Yeah,
thing
there's
is,
definitely more people doing that. I just got off the phone on my way to my office to chat with you. I just got off the phone with a guru, and I won't mention his name.
uh-huh.
But so you were one of the first ones to really open my eyes to creative financing,
Hmm.
and especially lease options. I got really excited about lease options after reading your book, and because I had been a landlord by accident, it's a long story, and it was a horrible experience. The tenant would call me every 2 weeks to fix something,
Right.
and then when I heard somebody talk about lease options, I got real excited, and then you wrote that book about creative financing, got super excited. So I've done a lot of lease options. Um, but one of the guys I learned how to do subject twos. Now, one of the things you were kind of talking about was kind of like buying a house subject to the existing mortgage. He was a very well-known guru at the time. When the market crashed in '08, he literally lost everything: his marriage, all of his real estate. Um, really, it's a horrible story. And I just talked to him yesterday. So he's been out of the business for the last 14 years. And he's thinking about making a comeback. I'm wanting to getting on my podcast, and he's totally open and honest with the story. But I was talking to him, and he said that he's seeing a lot of the same things happening now in
Yes.
the market that he was warning people about in 2006 and 7. So we're all always up and down in these cycles. But I bought a bunch of subject twos in '09. I mean, sorry, 2008 and 9.
Hmm.
And I I had about 12 of them, I think, at the time, and I lost them all to and I deeded them all back. I never missed a seller's mortgage payment. I'll say
Okay.
that, number one. I never missed a seller's mortgage payment, but I had to rob Peter to pay Paul to make those mortgage payments. Like, it was day 29, hour 23, minute 59, and I was making that mortgage payment right before it would hit that seller's credit report as a 30-day late, which is a big deal, right? So subsequently, I got behind on my own personal residence, my own mortgage on my own house, because I was making these other payments. What happened to me back then was the equity that I thought I had, just vanished, and vacancies were killing me. I had, at any one time, I would have 3 or 4 vacancies. And so each property at the beginning, when I did it, I thought the numbers were good. I had 15% equity in the deal. I was cash flowing a couple $100, quote unquote, cash flowing, but I had no reserves. And I did not have any money set aside for a rainy day to cover mortgage payments on a vacant house. Um, so here's my question for you. How can people who are doing a lot of these creative financing deals today, how can they stay out of trouble in case worst case scenario happens again? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And you always have to have a buffer. And, people always talk about the need for diversification. And, you have a little bit in the stock market, a little bit in bonds, a little bit in crypto, a little bit in this, a little bit in that. And you might as well just take a futures contract on the economy or something. So I believe in diversification, but within real estate. And my version is
Yeah.
a little bit of residential, a little bit of commercial, a little bit of industrial, a little bit of hospitality. And within residential, have a little bit of single family homes, maybe a duplex or two, maybe 1 or 2 small apartment buildings, not too many big ones. I'm not a big fan of large scale apartment buildings, and spread it out that way. So all this, being too much subject to and lease options, you're dependent on certain conditions. But if we
That's a
just
great
look,
point.
as we spoke at the beginning of the call here, compared with 40 years ago, the population has gone up by 60% in the United States. That means there are a lot more homes, a lot more podiatrists, a lot more car, tire, puncture repair shops, a lot more hairdressers, a lot more podiatrists, anything that comes to mind. And we cater to that, and they live in homes, and many of them work from premises. I know commercial's not doing so well. It's going to come back again. There is a big difference between 2008, Joe, and today, too, is that in 2008, when that went belly up, there was a surplus of homes on the market, and mortgage money was easy to get. We had no docs loans. You didn't need documents. Or what was the other kind of loan you had? It was too easy to get.
They're called liar loans.
Liar loans, yeah, stated income loans. You just state your income, and we accept it because the income from the property will cover it. Well, now it's a different situation because even though some conditions are not good for real estate, we've got a chronic shortage. There's still a chronic shortage of 4.1 million housing units in the US. So a
Yeah.
lot of homes have to be built before that's shored up. And the cost of lumber and steel and electrical wiring and everything else that goes into making a home, it's gone up. So there's upward pressure on prices. So I don't think we're going to see a major downturn in values of real estate. Now, who knows what might happen? We've got multiple wars going on around the world. They could escalate all of a sudden, go out of control, and then no one can know what's going to happen. But barring anything else, the population's increasing. We are all better off in terms of, normalized dollars, normalized for a year. So take inflation out of it. We're better off in spending power today than we were 5 years ago and 10 years ago and 50 years ago. We have more cars per person, more clothes, more Starbucks coffee, everything. We're better off. So I don't think there's going to be a massive collapse soon.
You talked about the 8 golden rules of real estate, and my lights went out. Can you talk about that? You mentioned one of those rules, seldom sell, but what were the rest of the rules? Because this ties in really perfectly with what
Gosh,
we're
you are
talking
really
about.
putting me to the test here. It's a good test. I'm sure I can look them up. They're in the book, Real Estate Riches.
Okay.
That's where I delineated them, but I can certainly go over some that come to mind. One is that you make your money when you buy.
Yeah.
People think that, it's not a very good property, but if I sit on it long enough, it'll go up. No, you make your money when you buy. So when you find something that is undervalued, oh my gosh, jump on it. Because I have a favorite saying, it's sort of my signature saying, Joe, and that's that the deal of the decade comes along about once a week. And
Are you the one that coined that?
absolutely, yeah, that's what I'm known
Oh
for.
my gosh, it's you!
And here's the
Because
thing, Joe. Yeah, no,
I love that. Say that again. The deal of the decade. Say it again. This is so
the
good.
deal of the decade comes along about once a week. And here's the thing. If you're a purist and you think, no, that's ridiculous, by definition, the deal of the decade comes along exactly every 10 years. Then when one of your listeners hears that you and I have just found a great deal, the deal of the decade, they will stop looking for 9.9 years because they already know that this decade's deal has been taken by you and I. But
Oh
when,
my
on
gosh,
the other hand,
I can't believe it was you that said that,
yeah,
because I've said that quote 100 times, and I've always said I don't remember who I heard this from or who said
now
it,
you
but I
know,
heard
man.
it
Now you
somewhere.
know. Yeah, no, it's all over my branding. Whereas if
Oh
you
wow,
believe that the deal of the decade really does come along about once a week,
yeah,
then you don't care how many other great deals you hear about. You're still looking for one. And your belief that it does come along once a week will be validated, just as the guy who doesn't believe it has his belief validated. It's
that's
that
so
old
good.
saying, what you believe ends up being true.
That's so good, and that's really helped me a lot when I was first getting started, because I was worried about missing out on a deal. And I would get discouraged when somebody else, one of my competition, would get a deal that I was looking at,
Right,
and I would get buried in kind of this discouragement. But
right.
when you said that, when I first heard that, I thought, oh my gosh, that gives me a lot of hope. There is another deal right around the corner, so I'm not going to quit and I'm not going to give up.
Exactly. And you've just got to keep looking. And most people don't. And here's the challenge we face these days, more so than 10 years ago, let alone 30 or 40 years ago. We have lost the ability to think. And when you think about it, 20 years ago, we had 46,500 bookstores in this country. They were all over airports. You'd go to the airport and kill the hour before boarding time by going to a bookstore and finding a great book to read on the flight. And now people don't read books. We're down to 6,000 bookstores because we're all scrolling, social media, disinformation, true information, but we don't know the difference anymore. We're absorbing information. People go and binge watch on Netflix. And I'm not knocking it. There are some good things on there. But if that's all you do, watch social media and binge, you're never thinking. And you never think about what's happening to the market and where's their population growth and should they go out and look. People spend all their free time, they're not sleeping, getting dressed or undressed or showering or eating or cleaning their teeth and all those things we have to do just to keep the machine going. They spend any spare time scrolling on their silly devices. And it doesn't create anything. You're absorbing information, not creating it. And the trick is to go out and find something you can do. Be creative. How can you put a creative deal together? How can you get creative financing? I think one of the rules is always ask the seller, not usually, always, whether they'll consider leaving any money in. And more often than not, they'll think, do you think I'm crazy? Of course I'm not leaving money in. I'm selling it because I need the money or whatever they say. But they're not going to hit you over the head with an umbrella, let alone shoot you because you asked them. And yet every now and then, Joe, 1 in 10, 1 in 15, you say, would you consider leaving some money in? And they say, yeah, that'd be okay because we're only going to put it in the bank and we're getting 0.2% interest there. I once asked a couple if they'd leave $300,000 in an $800,000 deal. They were in their 80s. And they said, well, we'll have to think about it overnight type thing. And I thought, well, that's not going to happen. And they came back the next morning, and I won't do it so painfully slowly, but they basically said, listen, we've thought about it. Would you consider letting us leave $500,000 in the deal? So if you never ask, you never know.
That's
Right?
so good.
Yeah.
Do you remember any of the other rules? I'm sorry for putting you on the spot. Do you remember any of the other rules?
Oh gosh, what have we said? You make your money when you buy, or never be the first to name a figure. That's a crucial one. So, I run a lot of events, Joe, and we have a lot of fun where I'll set up a hypothetical case and I'll split the room into two groups, buyers and sellers. And to the buyers, I take them apart out of earshot of the sellers and I say, listen, guys, you really want this property. And you want to do whatever it takes to get it. And you can go up to $1 million. And then I go to the sellers and I say to the sellers, listen, guys, you are desperate to sell this property and you're willing to go as low as 200,000 to just get it off your hands. And then I make them pair up, one buyer and one seller, and they've got 5 minutes to negotiate. Well, you'll be stunned how many pairs don't end up with the price because they can't agree. They're arguing, and you can hear the rooms loud. And then, you get the rest of them who have come to an agreed upon price. And then we chart it on a blackboard or a chart or whatever. And it's so funny to see how many couples end up doing a deal at 970, 980,000, and others do the deal at 220 and 230. And it's all largely dependent on who was the first to name a figure. Like those desperate to sell it say, well, I'd want at least 300 for it, and then they drop it further or whatever. So yeah, never be the first to name a figure. I remember I was leasing a commercial space once, Joe. It was to an oddball industry. It was a funeral parlor. And we were negotiating the lease. And I remember thinking, well, I want at least 5 years out of this guy. But instead of saying, will you sign up for lease? I said, well, how long would you want? And he said, well, I'd only do it if you give me 10 years with a right of renewal for another 10 years. That's effectively a 20-year lease.
Wow.
So yeah, that was another of.
And so this was a tenant that was leasing a property from you.
Correct, a commercial tenant leasing commercial space, and I made sure not to be the first, because if I'd said 5 years, he might have said, "Well, would you consider 7 or something?" Whereas I let him go first, and he came up with 20. Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you talk about what you're doing these days? You travel a lot, and I'm curious how you do it. Is it something that you just love doing, or you feel like you? What and why do you travel so much?
Well, there are two reasons. Firstly, I think people who have curiosity tend to experience a wider range of things than those who are happy to stay living in the same town that they were born in. They never go anywhere. I live in Phoenix. I'm stunned by the number of Phoenicians, and it's now the fifth largest city in the United States, by the way, fifth largest airport, fifth largest number of aircraft movements a year. I'm stunned by the number of people from Phoenix who've never been to the Grand Canyon. Or they say, oh, no, I've been there. I said, well, when did you last go? I think it was in seventh grade when I was a kid with my school. And it's a 3.5 hour drive away. And people come from all over the world to go there. So I
Yeah.
just have my curiosity on full beam. I love it. I love languages. I love different foods and all that. But there's another reason. And I think part of my success, possibly a big chunk of my success, if I've had any in real estate, is that I have traveled and I've seen things that people do in other countries, and I can't help but wonder, oh my gosh, why don't they do that anywhere else? And I'll give you two silly, trivial, literal examples that have no consequence for anyone for anything. But in the United States, you'll be very familiar with it. You come to a red light, and theoretically, once you've stopped, if you're just going around the corner, which in America, when you drive on the right means you're making a right-hand turn, you can go against the red light. If you've come to a stop and it's red, but you've looked and there's no traffic, you can go. No other country other than Canada, I believe, does that. So when you first see that, oh my God, they're all going through a red light, you think, I bet that causes a lot of accidents. I have personally not seen a single accident caused by someone going through a red light, turning a corner. And I wonder why the rest of the world doesn't adopt it, because it helps clear up intersections. All right.
Yeah.
And then just a commensurate thing, if you want to talk about cars, completely off the topic of real estate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here in America, the tail lights are red and your brake lights are red, but you're allowed to double up your brake lights with your tail lights. So the brakes come on, two red lights, and then if one of them is indicating, I've got to put my hands, one of them is indicating, it starts flashing. No big deal. Anywhere else in the world, your turn signal lights have to be orange or amber. And does it
Oh,
make a big
wow.
difference? No. But let's say it's raining, the view of the car in front is blocked by a truck, and there are leaves of a tree, and you see an orange light come on overseas, you instantly know they're turning. A red light comes on, instantly you know they're braking, and here you don't know. So I think it
Interesting.
would be better to make it uniform. And by the way, cars would be cheaper if they all had the same wiring, because BMW makes cars in Germany for export to America, and they make them in America for export elsewhere, and they've now got 4 different sets of wiring harnesses. So anyway, and that's a trivial example, but I've seen parking garage systems in Japan, which is basically like a paternoster elevator, but like a squashed up Ferris wheel. The car goes inside, people come out, and it goes up in this Ferris wheel type thing. You get a card to know where your car is, and when you come back, you put the card in, the car comes out. It uses much less space than a conventional car park with driveways and parking ways and all that sort of thing. There are no thefts or assaults or rapes or anything in the car park building because no one's inside it. No theft of property from the cars. It's extraordinarily efficient. Would it work in Phoenix where land is cheap? No. Does it work in New York? Absolutely. So we've introduced technologies like that from one part of the world where they're so normal people don't think about them to a part of the world where they've never thought about it. I've done that
That's
over
fascinating.
and over again. And I think it's given me a big edge because I've just experienced different things. And many people say, well, I get that by watching TV. And the answer is no, you don't. If you can't smell it and stub your toe when you
Yeah.
kick it and all that, so it's not the same experience. So
Yeah.
I enjoy that aspect. Things you can bring back from another country to enhance what we do back home in the US, or take ideas from the US and deploy them overseas. Nothing wrong with that.
And where are you today? Where are you right now?
And today, I'm on a tiny island called Malta. It's an independent nation. It's tiny. It's about 13 miles wide, 19 miles long. It's closer to, to Tunis in Tunisia and to, what is it, Libya than it is to Rome,
Wow.
Tripoli in Libya. But it's an EU member. And here's the interesting thing. I don't make many predictions because, as I say, they're not always right. But when Malta joined the EU, right, the former EEC, when they joined that, I predicted that real estate values would double in 3 years. And I was wrong, Joe. They trebled in 2 years. And
Wow.
it's a trend that whenever a nation joins the EU, their economy gets a kick because all of a sudden, instead of just the residents of Malta, which number about 500,000 people, 500,000, instead of those having free and unfettered access to the real estate market, suddenly it was open up to 330 million EU members.
Wow.
And by the same token, I made the prediction that when Brexit came through, there would be a commensurate downturn. And a lot of indicators, the value of the pound as opposed to the euro, why they never joined the euro is another story that we can talk about another time. And their economy hasn't been doing that well. So, keep an eye on global things like that, because if there's going to be another nation that joins the EU, maybe it's time to get on a plane, get your passport if you haven't got one. Americans have a ridiculously low uptake of passports relative to other Western nations. Get on a plane and go to some of these countries. At worst, you'll stay in a hotel where, as most Americans say, well, it's not as good as my whatever hotel back home. But you might find a bargain that's better than the bargain you could find back home, and you'll have an experience that's worth talking about.
Yeah.
So I
So
love.
are you buying real estate there right now? Do you also, when you travel, do you do seminars while you're traveling as well?
Yes, it's a mixture. Like 3 weeks ago, I was in Korea. I spoke at a conference there, and talked about the merits of investing in America. Korea, as I mentioned, has got the lowest birth rate in the world, so they've got a massive problem of a shrinking population. But that doesn't mean to say that they have to invest in Korea. They can invest in the U.S. and spend the profits in Korea if they want. Most
Hmm.
end up spending it in the US anyway. That's why the US is so strong. We encourage investors to go there. That's why most technologies are developed in the US, and often it's not always by Americans, it's by Indians or South Africans or wherever they're from. But if they've got a brilliant idea, they all want to come to the US, and that's because we've got the infrastructure and the funding for these technological upstarts and things like that. So it fuels itself. So the US is just a great place to be, but
Yeah.
let's not lose sight of other opportunities. Like when a nation joins the EU, I want to be there and see if I can participate in some way, advising locals or doing something myself or having a fund that gets involved. Here in Malta, just as an example, there are many cars, way too many cars for the number of roads, and there's a chronic shortage of parking spaces. And they have these garages or garages, as we call them in America, that are ridiculously priced, and the value of those has been going up exponentially as they're introducing 50 cars a day here, which is nothing in US terms, but for a population of 500,000, that means every year there are a lot more cars on the road. So
Hmm.
it's just a matter of seeing where are the opportunities.
Yeah.
I think gas stations are going to go defunct as the world inevitably will adopt EVs. And what are we going to do about EV charging stations? People are complaining that there aren't enough of them, and those that there are don't always work. I see that as a massive opportunity for someone to buy
Yeah.
strategically located real estate and put them in place.
Yeah. Well, man, that's fantastic. I wish we could talk more. We're running out of time. I don't have my glasses. I lost my glasses, but I think we have a couple minutes
Oh,
left
yeah,
for
nearly
the
at the
top
top
of
of
the
the
hour.
hour. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so how can people get a hold of you, Dolph?
One of the easiest ways, because I often offer courses and things. So if they just go to the website Dolph Live, DOLF, that's my first name, and then live, LIVE.com, they can see whatever we've got going there. And it's such a rare and unique name. I think if you go on Amazon and look up Dolph, my stuff tends to come up, or Dolph DeRoos, Amazon and all the other local sites. That's it there, dolphlive.com.
Nice.
And then they can see what the latest offering is, where we can offer to share more or teach more or whatever. We do all kinds of things, Joe. We do excursion trips. I do flyouts for clients. Just did one in the UK where a client wanted me to come and look at his commercial real estate portfolio to see what we might do to increase its value. That's kind of fun.
Nice. Yeah. Cool. So are you up to do you update social media much? Are you on a certain platform more?
Yes, I'm on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and all that. Look up the name Dolph DeRoos and usually add REI, real estate investor, Dolph DeRoos REI. There are a few fake accounts out there trying to benefit from our momentum, but you'll soon figure out which is the real one and which isn't. So yes, I
Awesome.
tend to post a lot on the social media, despite my comments about it. I think all these things have a place. Netflix does too. TV has a place. Just be judicious about what you consume. That's
Thank
my
you so
advice on
much.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Dolph DeRoos, for your time. It's such an honor and a privilege. I'm glad to finally get you on my show. Maybe see you at one of the next masterminds coming up. And are you going to be in Tampa in September by any chance?
I'm intending to. I'm trying to clear my schedule, but I hope to be there. Yes, I've been talking with the powers that be there.
Nice. Okay, guys, go to Dolph DeRusso's website right now, DOLFlive.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, just look at there'll be a link in the description down below. But I appreciate you, Dolph. Thanks for being on the show. Thank you, everybody.
Hey,
And
Joe,
we'll
thank
see you
you
later.
very much from me. Thank you for your kind words. It's been a real pleasure. I'm happy to do this again. I love this game, and I love,
Okay.
hearing stories of people who have had some success because I might have pushed them in a direction. So anytime.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, hold on one second, Dolph. I'm going to end this recording. But thank you, everybody. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.